Perry. The name of my sermon is I Prevailed, and I will be referencing the book of Genesis. Thank you. 2 years ago, I made a decision that would change my life forever. I decided to join the wrestling team at my school. Now, this on its own is nothing special, but 2 years ago, I wasn't a football player or a track star. I was just some band nerd. But nonetheless, I stuck with the decision. And eventually, the time for my first tournament came around. I remember being so hyped at my tournament, just so pumped, ready to wrestle. My match comes, I run up onto the mat. I shake my opponent's hand. The ref blows the whistle, and things go south very quickly. There are 6 minutes in a wrestling match. Mine lasted 30 seconds. Safe to say, my confidence was destroyed. And to my dismay, I had to wrestle again the next day. Tomorrow comes, and I'm a nervous wreck. Last thing I want to do is wrestle. But unfortunately, I'm obligated to wrestle. So when my match comes, I do what I can, and I just run onto the mat. I remember that day very fondly, because that was the day I won my very first wrestling match. And the crazy part is, I shouldn't have. During the first 2 periods, I stood my ground, but I was still losing. But for some odd reason, in the 3rd period, the final period, my opponent forfeited out of exhaustion. Even though I too was exhausted, even though I was less skilled and unexperienced, even though I was a complete nervous wreck, I prevailed. Even though the odds were stacked against me, I became victorious in the least likely of circumstances. Many of us have gone through a similar battle, perhaps not in a wrestling match, but with something we struggle with. This could be addiction, or fixing old habits, or just getting through a bad day. Whatever it may be, it can feel like we're wrestling with the devil sometimes. So that begs the question, how do you win a wrestling match against the devil? Luckily for us, we can look at Joseph. Now, Joseph's story is a very long story. So here's a brief overview of his struggle. One day, Joseph had a dream that his brothers would bow down to him. His brothers didn't like that very much, so they did what all siblings do best and plotted on his downfall. They threw Joseph in a well, had lunch next to the well, and then sold him to slavery. While in slavery, he was sold to Potiphar, and Joseph found favor in Potiphar's eyes and made him second command over his household. And just as things were looking up, tragedy struck. Joseph was accused of a crime he did not commit and was promptly thrown in prison. But the Lord had not forgotten Joseph, because while in prison, the Lord gave Joseph the ability to interpret dreams. Around this time, Pharaoh had a couple dreams himself. And so he asked Joseph to interpret them, and Joseph warned Pharaoh of an incoming famine. And thus, Pharaoh put Joseph second command over all of Egypt. Joseph had wrestled with the devil and succeeded despite his shortcomings. But one thing weird about Joseph's story is that we don't really know his own thoughts and feelings. I imagine him saying, "Why did I come so far just to lose it all again? Not only was I betrayed by my own flesh and blood, but just as I get back up to my feet, I lose it all again." Even though God had put Joseph through all this for what seemed like no good reason, there were better things waiting for him over that horizon. Perseverance is a hard skill to acquire and an even harder lesson to learn. This is very true for wrestling. Throughout all the weight cutting, grueling practices, frustration, late nights and early mornings, you have to remain strong and confident in yourself, because glory lies on the other side. When wrestling with the devil, there is one important thing to remember. He can only win if you let him win. You have the love and strength of God in your corner encouraging you. So stand up. Get to your feet. There's a match to win. Thank you.